Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Firefighters Podcast, where we seek to develop, inspire, and motivate the world of the emergency services operator through a series of wide-ranging conversations. Now, before we go any further, just hit that rate, follow, or subscribe button on whatever platform you're listening to. It's a key performance indicator for us and helps us reach even more people. Now, here's what we've got for you today.
It boiled down to 3 whats. What have I got? What am I doing about it? And what's coming up next? I've been using that in the command thing. So, right, what have you actually got? What are you doing about it? And what's round the corner that's going to bite you on the backside when something else happens? What do you expect to happen next? But it's one of the things, if you've not got the exposure and you're getting exposed to incidents on a daily, weekly basis, then you're ending up having to stick to a script to deal with it rather than being proactive and using that mind mapping that you've seen hundreds and hundreds of times before to actually deal with an incident. And I know where this is going. I know roughly how long it's going to take me to get this resolved. And these are the tactics that I'm going to employ to do that.
This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Gore-Tex Professional Fabrics. Now, we all know the working environment of a firefighter is filled with challenges. We face serious risks on the job, such as heat exhaustion, burns, physical and mental stress, and we frequently come into contact with high levels of toxic chemicals. Now, I have been wearing Gore-Tex for nearly 2 decades on the front line, working in hostile environments, tackling challenging incidents from firefighting to water incidents and in urban search and rescue environments. Gore-Tex have a well-earned reputation for protecting professionals in the fire and emergency services through their family of highly innovative, waterproof, breathable moisture barriers that exceeds global performance standards and are trusted worldwide. Gore-Tex, going further together. Andy, welcome to the podcast. How are you, my friend?
Thank you. I'm really well at the moment. Thank you very much. And thanks for inviting me to the podcast.
Mate, yeah, I mean, it's a pleasure to invite you, but also more than that, you and I have crossed paths many times over my very short career. Well, I say short, it's short by comparison to some of the incredible guests, including yourself. So, I mean, I used to look up to you and speak to you kind of from afar at different jobs or from different services or whatever. But for people that are unfamiliar with your good self, could you give us a whistle-stop tour of kind of when you joined the emergency services and kind of some of the steps through your career, I suppose?
Well, basically, I left school dead on 16 because I was sort of living at home with my mum. She was a single parent. She didn't have a lot of money anyway. So I had to get a job, and I started work as a components purchaser for an automotive company. I did that for about 6 months. It was either the army or something similar to that. You know, I thought about joining the paras.
Yeah.
Then I got into motorbikes and girls. So I thought, well, actually, I'll probably stay at home.
It's kind of a fork in the road for all of us at that age, isn't it?
Yeah. And then there was a friend of mine joined the fire service. And I thought, yeah, I wouldn't mind doing something like that. It's got some discipline again about it and everything else. So I thought, right, I'll apply. And they had what's called a supernumerary position, which you can join at 16. Basically, you went round all the different departments of the service and saw how they worked and did a little bit of work. It's sort of almost like work experience in control, fire prevention. We used to have a petroleum department at that point, headquarters.
I've known a few people that have done jobs like that. Was that a paid thing in like the way that they're trying to reinvigorate apprenticeships? Because I think that was so freaking valuable for so many people, but it kind of died a death at sort of in the 80s or 90s, didn't it?
It did. It was bang on. I joined as a supernumerary in 1978, November.
All right.
Went up to headquarters for the first time. I think the chief officer was a guy called Ken Lockyer.
You started in Leicestershire, didn't you?
Yes, I did. Yeah. Then I did 2 years as a supernumerary, moving around into different departments, ending up, I think, at Loughborough Station for a little short while and Wigston Fire Station. And then after the 2 years, I was then had to go through the actual recruitment process to actually become full-time. During that 2 years, obviously, I had to sort of get my chest. You had to have a minimum chest size of 36 with a 2-inch expansion or something like this. And one of the old sub officers in the day used to measure my chest every week, and he'd hold on to the tape and say, "Oh no, you're not quite there. You're not quite there." And I was training every single day of the week, trying to get my chest bigger and do this chest expansion. And then one day I got really pissed off with it all. So I went over to County Hall and asked the brigade doctor to measure my chest. And I was something like 38 with a 3-inch or 4-inch expansion. And then this sub officer came and said, "Right, come on then, let's do your chest measurement, see how you're going on." And he goes, "No, you're still not there." And I says, "No, I don't have to do it anymore." I says, I've been down to the doctor. And he went absolutely apeshit at me because I'd been over his head and got my chest measured. Anyway.
So for people, sorry, because you get a lot of members of the public listening and shit. So that the theoretical side of that was for the expansion of your lungs, your lung capacity, which should theoretically back then relate to your ability to be effective wearing breathing apparatus. But when we know about heart rate variability now and general fitness, and our knowledge is expanded on that, it kind of was a bit of a weird metric, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. And, later on in my career, I did quite a bit of work with the fitness testing for the entrance testing for the fire service, because it just got to the point where it was so easy to get in. And then as the group manager in charge of training, I'd got people that were sort of literally having a heart attack when we were going through
the pendulum swung a bit too far the other way, didn't it? And we ended up with some dross coming through. But also, could you imagine these days, on-call or retained station managers trying to measure the chest size of female applicants? I can just imagine the bloody disciplinaries cropping up all over the place.
It was like that. It was untrue, and then in those days, it was like a different world. Everybody's smoking away in the offices and all this sort of stuff. And then you'd get that. So come on, we've got to measure your chest, and then holding the tape so you couldn't do an expansion or pulling it too tight. So you're making your work a little bit harder and all this sort of stuff.
Pretty weird.
In 1980, then I was on the recruit school in 1980. Then I think at that particular point, there was a lot of county stations going into 2-pump status instead of just 1 pump and a retained pump.
Okay.
So there was quite a bit of a recruitment drive. And I ended up, in fact, it was Norman Dickerson. And he came from London, and he just took me to one side one day and he said, always get to your busiest station you can possibly get to so that you get your experience.
Absolutely.
So I said, right, Central's the place for me. That's where I want to go. And got posted to Loughborough, which at the time was relatively quiet, to be fair. But they did pick up quite a lot of RTCs and some fairly good fires, to be fair, and a lot of variation in different calls. I did about 18 months at Loughborough, then got transferred to Central Station, where I stayed for probably the bulk of my career, 27 years.
What was station sizes and stuff back then? Because people across, we have listeners across the world, but people across the UK Fire and Rescue Service are getting used to minimum riderships now of some 4 if they're lucky, but obviously we've got a few stations, with 2 riders per appliance across the whole of the UK. But back then, crews and watches the cultures were so much stronger, but I think that's because it was dissipated amongst more people. There was characters, there was crazy cats and mad as a box of frogs. What were the stations and watch sizes of the stations that you worked at?
At the beginning, Loughborough Station, we had about 10 or 12 on the watch. And there were times when there would be probably 2 people in a van or something like that if they were just spare. At Central Station, the watch that I was on White Watch at Central, and they were exactly what you said. We were called the Crazy Gang because they did have a big number of crazy type of characters on the watch. But there were 21 people on the watch itself. There were 2 pumps, a foam salvage tender, emergency tender, turntable ladder, HP, hydraulic platform, and a foam salvage tender as well. So, but it wasn't uncommon to have 4-5 people on an appliance. Sometimes you'd see retained stations, sometimes riding with 6.
Oh, mate, I've seen retained stations with 8 on a truck because you could get 4 on one side, 2 riding backwards and 2 in the front. And
Yeah.
there'd be people hanging off the back. You know, you see it on corners of the UK where they're absolutely cramming them in. But there was also we had a guest on a few times, Stephen, his name's going to escape me now, Steve Sadler. And
Yeah.
he says about that big red truck being a real cultural architect, a real cultural magnet, because again, more people on the stations, more people on the trucks create stronger cultures. Because if there's only 2 or 3 of you there, you only need one dickhead, don't you? And if
Yeah.
you've
Yeah.
got
Well,
5
that's
or
it.
6 people there, one dickhead can be challenged, corrected, you know,
Yeah.
and dissipated amongst all that frustration. But if there's just 3 or 2 of you, and one of you
Yeah.
is having a crap day, it's a crap day for everybody.
Yeah. I think every station, they all had a dickhead on the station, but
Yeah.
like you say, it wasn't sort of tolerated. You know, people, the bigger characters would tell the dickheads what to do and how to behave and all the rest of it. So you got your experience from people like that. You know, you'd follow people into an incident. You'd have your life in their hands, if you like, because you'd think this guy's done 10, 15 years. He knows what he's doing.
Yeah.
So I'm quite happy to follow that person into this particular fire or whatever situation, because you had that ultimate trust and belief that they knew what they were doing, and they'd had the exposure to incidents, which again we're lacking in over the past
That's
probably
it, mate.
10 years.
A lot of stations, some of the most experienced people on them stations might have 5 years at best.
Yeah, well, and you look at the senior officers in some services. We've just been working with another brigade a little bit further down south, and their whole senior structure, they've probably only got 8, 9 years in total.
Yeah. I
But that
forget
was
who the
unheard
chief
of.
was
You
we
know, I
worked with
spent
recently, and he said
yeah,
that 4 of the 49 chief fire officers, he retired like 2 or 3 years ago, and only
yeah,
4 of the chief fire officers that he was working with back then, only 4 of them are still chief fire officers. So
yeah,
40 something have changed hands.
yeah. And it's you get this. Well, I did 15 years before I even took a rank, basically because I thought I was probably being 18 years old on a watch. And, you know, you look at somebody when you're 18 and you look at somebody who's 30 and you think they're real old sweats and all the rest of it
Yeah.
until you get to 30. You know, I thought I was too young and immature probably to actually tell people what to do. Then all of a sudden, you know, at that particular time on the watches, as big as they were, we used to have big study groups and we used to play hard, but we used to learn our craft and our trade, if you like. So we took our exams. We had massive study groups. You couldn't ask anybody on that particular watch a question and try and catch somebody out because somebody would know the answer because
Yeah.
they were pretty well genned up. So, we played hard, but we actually knew what we were doing as well. So, and we were good firefighters. What I'd like to think we were good firefighters. It's changed a lot in terms of PPE and techniques and stuff.
Yeah, but it doesn't negate that old firemanship. Do you know what I mean? And I know people say, "Oh, firemanship, you mean firefightership?" No, the term doesn't work. Firemanship back then, like I remember doing drills with some of my sub officers and watch commanders and stuff like that, and they'd make you just stand near the front of the truck and listen to it
Yeah,
while they would switch on different branches and do different techniques, or you'd
yeah,
watch a long YouTube video and they'd ask you to articulate the different stages of fire growth and what you thought was happening inside there, and then what if we did this. Like doing like a decision tree. So if we took this
yeah,
decision, what do you expect to happen? And if
yeah,
we did this, and some people now will be like, "Oh, fuck off!" They can't be bothered in trying to learn that. And it's hot. I mean, and that's only a small few, perhaps, but
yeah,
I do think there's still so much to that. And I know people will argue, "Oh no, with the e-pumps, though, Pete, now you don't have to do anything; it will just correct for you." Yeah, but what if it doesn't? And also
yeah,
with portable pumping units or LPPs, it's not going to do that. So the principles of understanding hydrodynamics and pressure and flow still do apply. Maybe
yeah,
not to some of the Guccier pieces of gear, but don't use that as an excuse to be a crap firefighter.
yeah. Well, that's exactly what one of the things I was just about to tell you. You very rarely see people, using the feet on the delivery lines and stuff like that, just to feel the pressures and listen to the pump and all that sort of stuff. Exactly what you're saying. The e-pump controller does most of it for you. But gone are the
Yeah, but it's not
days
going to
when
change your intake. It's not going to change what's coming in. So you still
no,
need to understand overpressure. You still need to understand overdrawing.
yeah,
And people
exactly, yeah.
don't still teach them things though. Sometimes.
It's sad because those type of things um, exactly what we were saying, make firemanship and
Yeah.
understanding hydrodynamics, flow rates. I used to say, the people used to say in the training department about flow rates, droplet size, all this sort of stuff. And I said, you've either got enough or you haven't.
Mm.
Says, in my day, we would, not knowing the science behind stuff like flashover and backdraft, you'd go into a door entry, you would use a jet and put a figure of 8 through the room at the roof they would say, or the firefighters would say, that's to knock down any loose particles of plasterboard or whatever. But inadvertently, you were cooling down the gas layer as well.
Yeah.
So then you could make progress.
Yeah. They didn't know the fact they were turning those actives into passive and doing that barrier calling, doing that boundary calling. They were doing some of the right stuff, but sometimes not always understanding the why behind it. And people do that now. I was on a course recently, a fire behavior course, and they said you've got to be able to answer the fourth why. Because if you said, okay, I'm going to put a figure of 8 in here, I'm going to do a wave method, I'm going to do a pulse, and someone says why, now you might have an answer for the why, or you might just go, because that's what I was shown. That's not an answer for an instructor. You can't say that. That should never be your answer to anything. You've got to be able to go past the first, the second, and the third why, and keep. And if they want to go deeper, you need to be able. And if you can't, that's okay. But then know that you've then got to go away and learn that.
Yeah, that's it's funny. It's in the command that I've been since I finished and retired from the fire service. I've been working down at the fire service college, and just before I went, I had a really good command group over the East Midlands region, and one of the group managers that I used to work with did a degree in disaster management, and he says, I've spent 5 years doing this degree, and all it's taught me is that it boils down to 3 whats. And it's what have I got? What am I doing about it? And what's coming up next? And I've been using that in the command thing. So, right, what have you actually got? What are you doing about it? And what's round the corner that's going to bite you on the backside when something else happens? What do you expect to happen next? We used to see people doing level 1 incident command courses, going to a house fire, person's reported, 2BA, hose reel, standard sort of scripts. Yeah, they'd go in, but they'd forget the third what's coming up next. Then there'd be somebody standing at the window, or one of the BA wearers coming out with a casualty, screaming casualty, and there's no casualty handling area or anything set up, or they weren't even ready for it.
Yeah.
And you think, well, that should have been in the back of your mind from tip out.
That demonstrates that next level of thinking, doesn't it? Yeah. When the station manager is arriving, that's the next level of thinking, because they're saying, okay, so you've told me you've made up for 5 pumps. What do you think's going to happen? Yeah. And what are you going to use them for? Do you know what I mean? What's your plan? Because you should only be reactive, really, for the first 10, 15 minutes or however long it takes you, probably less than that, really, brutally honest, to get a big hug on the incident. And then everything should be proactive, unless there's a massive curveball of a piece of information or an unknown hazard that crops up. You shouldn't continually be reactive. You should be guiding it then. It shouldn't be, constant bomb burst trying to catch things as they catch you out.
Exactly. Yeah, but it's one of the things, if you've not got the exposure and you're getting exposed to incidents on a daily, weekly basis, then you're ending up having to stick to a script to deal with it rather and react to it, rather than being proactive and using that mind mapping that you've seen hundreds and hundreds of times before to actually deal with an incident. And I know where this is going. I know roughly how long it's going to take me to get this resolved. Yeah. And these are the tactics that I'm going to employ to do that.
Within your career, you managed a training department, and we just kind of skipped over, and that's my fault, because I'd love to hear from you, like, what your initial training was like versus then what you saw other people delivering. And then when you finally reached that point where you were actually in charge of a training department, in charge of one of the ones in the UK Fire and Rescue Service, how you saw the lay of the land, the change of the firefighter role, but also, as you just articulated there, the fact that over the last decade or so, we've had a 40% reduction in calls. So how do we simulate that same level of pressure, and how do you see good instructors behaving? Because like when I joined, similar to yourself, although it was nowhere near the time frame as yourself, there was a hell of a lot more discipline, and I quite romanticized some of that, but also there was a bit too much bullying and stuff like that. So what was it like when you joined, and what did you try and recreate, the good, the bad, and the ugly, when you were in that position of guiding it?
Yeah, well, I remember my very first day. We were trained at Central Fire Station. We had initially we had a parade with your full undress uniform on. One of the guys on the course was late, and he walked down the ramp at Central Station with his kit bag across his shoulder, looking like Steve McQueen coming out of wherever. And I remember one of the instructors literally having a heart attack, got him to do about 20 press ups, literally kicking him into the house that we had to get changed in to get his kit on. And the discipline was you'd get the instructors would screaming and shouting at you and making you do certain things, carrying ladders round the block for all day until you just couldn't go anymore and drop the ladder and this type of thing. But it did instill that sort of stuff. If I say jump, the answer I want to see is how high do you want me to jump, sir?
Yeah.
That
Yes,
type of
sir,
thing.
sir, sir.
That
3 bags full. Yeah.
seemed, well, it was, and it all it seemed to disappear, and eventually we lost the shirts and ties and rank markings, and the chief officer would be saying, "Oh, call me by my first name" and stuff like this. And in fact, I ended up getting a bollocking once from one of our assistant chief officer when I first got promoted up to headquarters. I wrote a report, dropped it on his desk, and said, it was out of the office at the time, left a post-it note on it saying, can you cast me your eye over this to make sure I'm on the right lines, sir? And then at tea break, in front of about 15 station managers, he walked to me and goes, "There's your first fucking mistake." I goes, "What's that?" He goes, "Calling me sir." I said, "Well, I'm sorry, but when I joined, anybody at station manager and above level, you'd give them a salute." I
Yeah,
says,
but with the
"And
greatest of
anybody I'd call
respect, I
sir."
still do that now. I know I don't salute because I was never part of the military, but I call everybody sir, not because of my training schools, because how I was raised.
Exactly.
So, with the greatest of respect, if you said to me, "Don't say this," and I say it to people in the street, I say
Yeah.
it to people at Tesco's.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Morning, sir. Oh no, sir, please, sir, you go first. You know what I mean? People are like, "Oh, you don't need to come out." Oh, it's okay. It's a sign of respect because I don't know your name. Yeah, and I don't want to call you
Yeah.
mate or buddy. Yeah,
Exactly.
I'm going to call
Yeah.
you sir because
And
I
it's
think it's a term of respect for me. But also, you and I, we had different upbringings as well. You did this at 16. I had a couple of crap jobs. I was working on market stalls and factories, and I was working in my dad's building firm. And you got a different character building when you were that age as well. You had a Saturday job where someone would play tricks on you, and the older person would do this. And some people say, "Oh, that was bullying, and that was minimum wage," and blah. Yeah, okay, a
yeah.
little bit, but it also built character.
Exactly. It was character building, and that was the type of thing that the training schools were like. It was hard work. We had people that would come out of the military and they said, "Blimey, my military training was easier than this."
Yeah.
Once you'd done your training course, you were on the station, and exactly that. It's once you become that type of person, it was ingrained into me to call people sir, whether it was an old guy in the street or like exactly what you've just said, or somebody with some authority in the fire service. And I still would, if I saw an old officer that I used to work with, I'd still call them sir.
100%.
Um, then eventually, I don't know whether it was just the standard of people that or whether it was the drive in the British Fire Service to get more inclusive and everything else. But the standard of or the quality of people, when I first joined, you had to be either ex-service or had a trade
Yeah.
to get in. And then we seemed to get what I call jobbing firefighters. I think the first guy that I know joined the fire service, and within 18 months to 2 years, left to go back into nursing. And he said, "I'm bored with this." He said, "I thought this would be a much more exciting job. I get the same money as in the NHS as I do here. The time off's better, and I'm bored stiff. I'm leaving." And he went back into nursing rather than staying in the fire service. And that was when I joined. It was a job for life.
Yeah.
But I think that we're getting to the point where people join the fire service and it's almost like it's on my CV. I was a firefighter for a couple of 3 years or 4 years. I'm not 100% sure about the amount of people that are joining and stay for the full 30 years or more.
No, but when we say the job, I always chat because when people say, oh, the culture as well, I said the culture isn't an actual thing. The culture is just a collective of people. The fire service isn't a thing. It was here long before us and it'll be long after, but it's just a collection of people. So I always say if I love my job and I work at whatever station here in the UK and you work at that station in wherever else in the UK, I love my job, you hate your job. Well, the pay is pretty much the same. The kit is very similar. The policies are probably quite similar. It's the people. You've got people that you don't want to work with or don't want to work with you, and you've not got a good place to be. And I always say, watch commander on the stations that I work on. Look, gang, we've got 12 hours. Really, with all due respect, we can do whatever we like. Yes, we've got some metrics to tick, but the whole day is very flexible. We can do whatever we like, in whatever times we like. We've got a few things that we need to do. And the rest of it, where do we want to train? Where do we want to go? What do we want to have for lunch? What do we want to look at today? What businesses do we want to visit? What places do we want to go to? Life is boring for boring people. And I think some people have just bought the farm. Do you know what I mean? They've swallowed the pill and they wave around policies and procedures and think that that's how they should do their job. No, that's an absolute last resort. I always say if I have to hold a policy between me and you, we have failed in our relationship because I should never need to refer to that thing. We should have a strong enough relationship on my watch, on our watch, to talk about, what is the problem here? That should be a discussion we can have.
Yeah, that's a very good point you raised about people on watches, especially when you become into the sort of middle management or the junior management team at watch manager level and above. What my watch, when I was a watch manager, I used to be a rider station officer at Central Station. After the first strike, it changed to watch manager, so I was busted.
Well, London's the only place that's got them now, isn't it? It's the last bastions of the rider station officers.
Yeah, I lost my rank markings, £5,000 a year, and then when we came back after the strike, they said, "Well, after 6 months, they said, here's your rank markings back and your white helmet, and can I have my £5,000 back?" And he goes, "No, but here's a bit more responsibility for you as well." But
it's an opportunity for you, Andy. Here's an opportunity for you, mate.
Yeah, I've heard that a few times. But we'd get people on watches, and you're exactly right in what you say. They would go in through it and they'd do as least as they possibly could throughout the day. I had a watch full of 50% of the watch. There was 17 on the watch. 50% of them super keen, really wanted to learn the craft. They were passionate about what they did and they had pride in what they were doing. And they were professional about everything they did. And then I had another 50% that were switched off, just wanted to tick the hours away and disappear. And I tried everything. I did a DMS in management years ago, 97, 98. I tried every management technique, giving them some sort of fulfillment and some priorities for them to hit and targets and all sorts of stuff. But it just didn't work. And these guys made the whole watch start going downhill.
Right.
From literally one or two people who just didn't give a toss about anything. Yeah. And then one day we were out doing some drilling. I'd always be the first down there with the fire kit on, next to the pole drop, and then the tannoy would be next to that. And I'd say, right, full fire kit, 0800, full fire kit for drill. And then we'd all come outside. The keen lads would be out and they'd start throwing ladders and using the jets and BA or whatever. And then 15 minutes later, these 1, 2 or 3 individuals would come sauntering down until the point where I just lost my rag. And I said, right, you 3, get your fire kit off, get back upstairs and drink tea. And they went, what? Are you joking? I said, no, I'm not bloody joking. I said, I've had enough of it. Every single time, if anybody's earned the respect not to come out on the drill ground, that's me, because I'm the boss. I could get my crew manager and my watch manager to do that. So get upstairs, drink tea, and piss off. Yeah. And then the next day, for virtually a shift, it's same story. 15 minutes late, getting the fire kit on, dawdling out. No, get back upstairs. I don't want you out here with us. These guys here are keen and they want to learn what the craft is all about.
I always say I'd rather have a hole than an arsehole, because people like that are drains. They're energy vampires. They take away more from the session than they give, and I'd rather them not be there.
Yeah, but then all of a sudden, one day, it was the first night of the second shift, and I said 17:59 full fire kit for drill, and then one of the famous 3 stood at the pole drop with his fire kit on. And I said, "Oh, you coming out to play today?" Then he says, "Yeah." And then I didn't know how I did it because I've been trying for years. But then it broke the three musketeers, if you like. It broke the three musketeers, and one by one, they started switching on or transferring away from the station to get to somewhere, they can get away with it. But it did. It came down, and for the last 6 months of this one individual's career, it was like the first in and last out at every job we went to.
Oh, wow.
And
Do you think that was because the threat of losing respect? Because some people like that, they go, look, I could do this with my eyes closed. This is beneath me. I don't need to be here. You know I'm a good firefighter. And that's such a shame, but that can be a one or two on the watch sometimes. But do you think, and I'm just guessing, shooting the wind here, but it's like, if they lose the respect from the people that really are, good and are worth like yourself, I'm not blowing smoke up your ass, but it's like that person knows I'm good at my job. But if that person all of a sudden goes, you know what? I think you've lost it, mate. I think you've lost the passion. I think you're a shit firefighter,
That's yeah, you're exactly right. And that's virtually what happened when I said, I did use those words, and I said, you're a bunch of shitheads. You are absolutely shit as firefighters. I've got trainees coming through that are super keen. They know where the water is. They know where the double hydrants are. They know where the tanks are. They know where the risks are. They know the routes, the topography. It's just they should be looking at you to give them that knowledge, not the other way around. And the older guys who had been switched off for such a long time were looking at the younger section to teach them, and I thought it's completely wrong. And then they'd lost all of that respect until the very, very last 6 months of one individual's career, and just started switching back on again. And he got a little bit of respect before he retired. Well, you always get it. Some people say this job's shit, this job's crap, and I just sit down and say, well, if it's that crap, go and find something else.
Yeah, my mate earns 80 grand as an electrician. Okay, do you want to be an electrician all day, every day? Yeah, no. Well, shut up then. Do you know what I mean? I'll go and be an electrician. I always say I'd rather have a mindset than a skill set, because it's good to have a skill set, but I can teach you a skill set in maybe, depending on what it is, 2 months, 6 months, a year. I can teach you a skill set. A mindset is very difficult to embed in someone.
Well, that's a funny point that you've raised there, because a part of my job that I do now, since I've retired, is I teach for the CQC, the Care Quality Commission, at residential homes. And one of my opening gambits is, my career and what I do. I do a bit of manual handling training and bits and bobs like that, fire marshal, fire extinguisher training. And I say to these, look, I'm in awe of you guys in the care profession. And they all sort of sit there and they sort of look at you a bit funny. And I said, because when I joined the fire service, I knew that the money wasn't brilliant. The shifts were antisocial. If there was ever a do-on or a wedding or whatever, it would be when you're on nights. Working conditions aren't particularly very good at times. And the people in the care industry are very, very similar to us. I joined because I wanted to look after people. That's what I wanted to do all my career. And these people joined in an elderly care home because they want to look after people and make a difference to people's lives. So it's very, very similar to the fire service. Once they're in for a long time. They can get more money packing crisps in a crisp factory.
Yeah.
But they stay at these care homes looking after elderly people. The working conditions are sometimes terrible. The pay's absolutely crap. They're being asked to do more with less. And yet they stay there to look after people,
Do you know what, though? Some people join for different reasons in the fire service. And this is a great point I'd love to ask you now, because you joined and I joined to help people. But some people join to put out fires, which is okay. But there's a very critical difference there. And I've seen it show itself in the last decade or so. Because if you joined to put out fires, you were still, not accidentally, but you were still helping people as well. But when you weren't going to fires, so when you were asked to go and do a community safety event or present to this, or you were asked to go and do some RTC instructing somewhere, or you were asked to do co-responding, some people were like, no, I'm a firefighter. And I'm like, that's the difference. And it doesn't make it better or worse. But like I say, if you join to help, and that's why I think it's so important to articulate to people what the fire service is now and the roles that we do,
Yeah.
because otherwise you're selling them you're selling them a fake. Because if you tell them we just put fires out all the time, that ain't what we do. And this is not a community safety pitch, hashtag fire, not just fires or whatever it is. But it's like, it depends on the why. Why did you join?
Yeah. Well, it's when I was station manager and group manager, I used to interview people coming into for the recruitment route to basically. And a lot of the times I'd ask why do you want to be a fire service? I was asked, why do you want to join the fire service? Well, it's a varied job. It's exciting. You're doing something different every day. It's a skill. You learn a trade as well at the same time. It's something that I've always wanted to do. And then the guy interviewing me said, well, why don't you join the police then? Because that sounds exactly the same.
Mm.
And I said, well, the police are fighting against a certain element of the community, namely criminals, but the fire service is fighting for the good of everybody.
Yeah.
And when I was interviewing people, when I've asked them why do you want to join the fire service, and I'd also say, do you realise that in your working day as a firefighter, you will only be fighting fires for less than 1% of the day.
Mm.
The rest of it will be made up with community fire safety events and testing of equipment, training, all that sort of stuff. It's not fighting fires every day. And I think the guy I was talking to you about earlier on, who was in the nursing industry before came to the fire service and went back into nursing, I think he joined to be a firefighter and then realised he was on a busy station. He was on a busy station in the city. And said, look, this is not for me. I expected to be going out firefighting every day, and I'm not.
Yeah, but, to put a similar analogy to that, a lot of people idealize the military, which I do as well. I think it's an incredible job that they do and have a great respect for them. However, when you think about what the military do, some people think they train to go to war. Yes, and they do a lot of training. If you look at the statistics, and I'll get these numbers wrong, but it was something like only 12% of the military ever deploy to a conflict zone. That's just, do they deploy to the conflict zone? So that also includes admin, cooks, logistics, planning, intelligence, everything like that. Of that 11 or 12%, only 4% of them will ever actually be in a conflict, will ever actually be in contact somewhere across the world. Yet they still train very well, very hard every day. So when you hear people now going, oh, well, we don't get the jobs anymore, so, we don't really train. We still attend a lot of bloody calls. A massive percentage of the fire and rescue service, probably in the 90s, still go to some form of an operational incident, far more than the military ever will. Yet, we sometimes struggle to encourage and incentivize people to train hard, like you talk about some of the crews you first worked with, because it's still very inevitable. You could do a whole career in the military and never attend, never actually be in conflict. But it is extraordinarily likely, if not guaranteed, you are going to attend an operational incident of some form in your fire and rescue service, if not every set.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. And going back to your point about when people join the fire services, you don't join just to go out and put fires out. In today's society, I think the fire service is still seen, the firefighters, as role models.
Yeah.
And we should be capitalising on that and being some sort of role models for schools, for drug users and outreach.
You're like a moral compass for the community.
Exactly, yeah. So if we don't hold our standards at the very highest level, then we're slowly going to become, or not become role models anymore.
Mate, it's the whole point of the podcast, because I speak to people like you in private all the time, and I'm like, these people are great examples. Why the hell are we hiding them? Why are we ashamed? Why do we're scared to death of committing professional suicide? I know we say, people, look, I'll never let anybody commit professional suicide on the podcast. I'll edit it, I'll take it down, whatever. But I'm like, don't just close the bay doors and hide away from the community, because you become insignificant. We've got such a great USP. We've got such a great product. And the fire service was here long before me and you, and it will be here long after. But people always say, leave it better than you found it. But if we're hiding people and we're hiding our passion and we're discouraging the crazy, quirky characters from being their beautifully crazy, quirky selves, they are the best thing we've got. The people. It's not the badge or the kit or whatever. It's the people.
Yeah. Well, the people who make it. It's I used to lecture a lot about risk, and while I was in the fire service initially as well, as I joined the fire service, I used to race motorbikes at British standard level and all the rest of it national level. And I used to put a video up of a lot of MotoGP riders falling off and getting probably badly hurt and all the rest of it. And then I asked the question, said, "Is that dangerous?" And he said, yeah, really dangerous. And I said, well, when you look at it, it's very, very similar to what we do in the fire service. We've got PPE, leathers, helmet, boots, gloves. You test those every day, make sure that you've got the best kit, and your appliance or your motorbike is got the best chains and batteries and everything else on it, so it's not going to break down and take you there to the win and stuff. And I said, so, we try to eliminate the risks to people. However, when we recruit people, we recruit risk takers.
Yes.
You ask anybody who's coming in, what do you like? What are your hobbies? I like football, rugby, climbing, sailing, motorbikes.
I like mountain climbing. I like this. I like, doing too much when I shouldn't.
Exactly. So we inherently recruit risk takers, but then we try to knock out all the risk taking attitude to people.
I was on a fire behavior course recently, and there was like 10 out of the 12 people when they presented one of the debriefs. I'm not going to talk about which one it was, but they were talking about a debrief, and they were looking at the outside of it, and they said, right, no persons reported. Who here would send in firefighters? And there was only, and I'm not great, it might be the wrong answer, but there's only me and one other that would send people in. And they're like, it's not worth the life. But I was like, do you understand the economical value of that building as well? And also, if we never send firefighters in unless there's persons reported, then you're actually heightening. Come on, guys, get your head in the risk analysis. If you reduce the frequency of exposing them to that risk, the likelihood they're going to make a mistake is higher. Yeah. So if we're not actually putting firefighters into buildings with all their training, with all their PPE, with a control measure and a command structure in place, they're never going to get the exposure. But some people will go, it's not worth it. It's not risk of life. I'm not saying it's worth the risk of a life of a firefighter. I'm hoping they're not going to die, because we should have trained them well.
We're in the risk bit. We're in the risk business, and if I was the manager of a factory or whatever, and we had a small fire that was getting bigger, and the fire service stood outside and said, "I'm not putting anybody in. It's not worth the risk to my firefighters and my crew," I'd be saying, well, what about the risk to my business and the 50 people that work for me, because they're not going to have a job at the end of the week,
and their families and their kids,
exactly.
And all of the local economy that's going to come to my hotel, and my family, and then that deteriorates into, there could be domestic violence. That person might have to go on welfare. I have to sack them. We turn a blind eye to that.
Yeah. So my answer to that would be, I bloody expect you to go inside there and take a little bit of risk and salvage whatever you possibly can of my business, so I can get it back up and running and keep these people's mortgages paid and food on the table for the 5 or 10 or 50 people that work for me. So 100%. Get your ass back in there and put the bloody fire out.
That's what worries me about some of this risk aversion. Sometimes it's good intentions, but we're throwing the baby out with the bathwater sometimes. You've spoken a lot about aspects of how the mind works. And I remember before we came on the podcast, you spoke about sort of a BBC thing that you were part of during your career that kind of went into that aspect of intuition. And I'd love if you could share that, if you could.
Well, it was a television program made by the BBC by Professor Winston, and he was doing the actual series was called Mindworks, I think, and one of the series was about intuition. They asked for examples of where you may have used an intuition or a gut feeling at an incident. So I wrote a quick précis of this incident we went to. We'd just literally gone on the back of backdraft training, where they had a little doll's house and they closed the door and then opened the door a few minutes later, and we had a little burp of fire come out of this little doll's house. I thought, oh, that's quite interesting. I've not seen that so much now. Probably building construction has got a lot better and made buildings a little bit more airtight than they used to be. So we had a lead up of about 3 or 4 jobs where the actual fire had actually nearly burnt itself out. All the classic signs and symptoms of a backdraft, but I hadn't actually gone through the full process of going through a backdraft. And then we had it was a disused bingo hall in the middle of the city. It used to be a cinema, I think, at one point. So it was about the size of a football pitch, big old domed roof. And I think in the past, the old domed roof had been felted years and years and years and kept leaking. So they put a pitched roof on the top of the domed roof.
Mm.
It was under demolition, and the builders, for some strange reason, or it was an accidental fire that was started inside the bingo hall. We got tipped out to it. All the air bricks on the front, the doors, the windows had been sealed up with galvanized steel sheets, so there was no air getting into the building. The smoke was pulsating out of a top window in the actual roof space itself, and we got a jet, and I requested, I think, 6 pumps initially and a turntable ladder. But the water pressure at that particular area was really, really bad.
Mm.
So I said, right, what we'll do is we'll open the front door. So we've made entry through the front doors, and I sent 4 breathing apparatus wearers with a jet into the foyer. And as we opened the doors, instead of the smoke coming out to us, it sucked itself back in. Like the best example would be taking bricks out of a dam and then the water flowing backwards. And this was the smoke flowing backwards into the building. I thought, well, that's a bit strange. Normally it's a bit buoyant and it comes out to us. And, you get some heat and buoyancy in the smoke gases that's coming out to us. So I said, right, stay under this lintel. A bit of old firemanship there. You'll be safe under there for a bit and don't move. Just stay there and try and fight the fire if you can possibly see it. Ran around the side and spoke to my LF at the time. Or it might have been a sub, actually. I might have been a rider. So I was a rider station officer at the time. Said, well, what have you seen? He said, well, we opened the side door to get some breathing apparatus wearers and a jet in there, and all the smoke's going back into the building. I thought, well, this is like that backdraft training we've just had.
Yeah,
but how long have I got?
Yeah.
Have I got 5 minutes? In the little doll's house, it took, 2 or 3, 4, 5 minutes. But this is the size of a football pitch. So have I got 50 minutes or 5 minutes? I don't know. I haven't got a bloody clue. And I had a real horrible feeling. I thought, this just doesn't feel right.
Yeah.
So I ran around the front, and by that time I got into the foyer, and everybody had literally, all the smoke had literally gone into the building, and I could see the breathing apparatus team in front of me. So I went up to the guys, put my hand on one of the shoulders, said, right, I'm blowing the whistle, I'm withdrawing you. He said, no, we're all right, we're all right. I said, no, I'm withdrawing you. Just at that moment, there was a very, very dull thud, if you like, and then a heat wave of hot smoke, gases, hit me in the face. I'd not got a breathing apparatus set on, so I felt that. I thought, oh, shit, I burnt my face off or something like this. Blowing the whistle, and we were scrabbling to get out. I fell over, and they used me as a ramp, as you would do as getting out into the street. And when the smoke had cleared, I felt the heat wave go over my back. Looked over to the side where my pump operator was, and he was curled up, standing in the pump bay. I turned around at 180 degrees to look at where the fire was, and the building had literally collapsed completely. So there was no build. So the backdraft had actually destroyed the building completely. By that time, the fire was spreading to a couple of terraced houses adjoining that, so we had to rescue some people there. Nobody would come and take it off me because they said, I could imagine that they were saying, I'm not putting my name on this. I'd never lost a building before in my life, and we'd only been there 15 minutes. But I wanted, at that particular point, just a break to have a drink, gather my thoughts, and get back into work again.
Wear yourself away, yeah.
Yeah. But that didn't come. And then Professor Winston sat down and took me to one side and said, right, this is a really good example of what intuition's about. There's no such thing as intuition. That gut feeling that you felt was because of years and years of pattern matching and the memories of the fires that you've been to and seen. You've seen the smoke's been buoyant and it's always coming out towards you. You've seen the colour of the smoke. It was that orangey yellowy coloured smoke that was pulsating and going back into the building. The fire, when it's got a lot of oxygen, is popping and crackling and making quite a lot of noise because it's very dynamic. But this fire, it was completely silent. There was no popping and crackling or banging or anything else like that. It was really, really quiet. So again, it's triggering off these sensations to say, this doesn't feel right. This is not quite right. This is not what I've been used to or seen in the past. And that's the thing when you said, instead of sitting there carrying on doing what you're doing and putting breathing apparatus in after breathing apparatus in and getting 4 people killed, you blew the whistle and brought people out because you didn't think you thought something wasn't quite right, which was the right thing to do.
Mate, there's a great example of that. I think it's in a book called Black Box Thinking. I've referenced it several times on the podcast. And that thought, and Sabrina Cohen-Hatton's done a bit of work on this as well about decisions and encoding and memory recognition and recalling and stuff like that. Because when you observe things and someone gets a gut instinct, they're like, I don't know what this gut instinct or intuition, and they think of it like a mythical thing, like, oh, so that guy or girl, she's just got good gut instinct. And you're like, no, what your mind is doing is thrashing through a Rolodex of images, situations, and it's following that route as far as it can till it hits a dead end, then it bouncing in a different route, and it's pulling all of these files out and mapping them over the top of each other. From what you're seeing in front of you now, the last time I saw a thing in that place doing this thing, I can find subconsciously 38 examples of what I think happens next, but it's doing it subconsciously. So your cognitive mind can't follow that thought pattern because it's going too fast. And this is how we get out of the way just before someone punches us. But because we read the situation, we read the room, we read the fire dynamics and the situation and our position and the smoke. And there was a great example in that book where a firefighter's in with a brand new firefighter. He's the lead, there's a BA team, and he's on the ground floor and this fire's growing, it's hot, there's loads and loads of smoke, but he's doing all of the techniques that he's used to and he's not getting the right thing. And they're progressing into the incident, but the fire's just keeping growing, or the heat, is keep growing. And he doesn't like it and he doesn't know what's up with it. And he pulls him and his wearer out. And 4 seconds later, the floor collapses because the fire was in the basement that nobody knew it had. And all of that heat was just what was pushing through. It was pushing through the floorboards. That's where all the smoke was coming from. That's what was growing. And he didn't know it because he didn't have that piece of information. But he knew, I'm doing all the stuff I think should work, but I'm not getting the desired result. And that gut instinct kicks in, doesn't it?
Yeah, but without the exposure to constant realistic incidents, we're going to lose all of that as well. So, they've not got that pattern matching to draw on. Some people that have been in the 80s and 90s and, the call rates were immense. We'd be out between 7 and 10 times every single night. And on a weekend, you'd have 8 calls. One of those would be a breathing apparatus job and one would be a rescue. And that was virtually every weekend. And then every 3 weeks, you'd have a massive factory fire like we had the other week.
Yeah. Valentine's Day and Christmas, you'd always get your suicides and, you could almost plan some of them, couldn't you?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. But without that exposure, you're not going to get those pattern matching, that Rolodex that you've got in your mind to say, well, this doesn't feel right, because you don't know what right feels like.
Yeah. How do we simulate that? I mean, when you're training incident commanders now who haven't had those experiences, I mean, we've got incident commanders in the brigade that I work for that have never worn in a fire, and they're in charge, and especially now we're going to get direct entry and stuff like that. It's going to get direct entry. People come in at station manager. You'll probably end up training some of them as part of your company. How do we warn against that? How do we ensure that they have realistic training? And I know maybe you do or don't have a plan. I'm sure you have loads of discussions with different people about this sort of stuff. But what are some of the prevailing opinions about how we can prepare people for the future of incident command?
I think a lot of people, a lot of services up and down the country went over to XVR to run simulations for the graphic effects for incident command.
We've had Catherine Lamb on the podcast.
Yeah, and it's got its place. I think it has got its place somewhere, but if it's not 100% realistic, what we did with Centurion Command Solutions is use an American software that we can take a picture of a particular building and add flames and smoke and
That
noise
sim trainer.
and very it's yeah, SimShare is what the is the company that we
Technology, yeah.
use. There's one or two other
There's a lots of
software
variations, but
companies,
yeah.
yeah, and some of them are absolutely fantastic, but they take a long time to build.
Yes.
But you need something that's absolutely realistic, and if it's realistic and it's tied to a service's risk profile, you can test the risk plans as well at the same time, depending, and you can make it as big as or as small as you possibly as like. Um, but I think, or the only other thing is that that I've been having constant talks and discussions with is actually assessing people on the actually at incidents.
Mm,
So it's a real incident and tagging along and going to see that from the very first few minutes.
yeah.
Where firefighters are going to get injured or
Mm.
potentially killed, it's normally either at the very beginning or the very end of an incident. It's not so much when it's all under control and everything's being controlled.
Yeah.
It's when people are taking a little bit more risk at the initial incident, where the incident is under resourced
Mm.
and you're overtasked. And then when we've got control of the incident, we send everybody back to station, have a get the appliances back, and then all of a sudden we're under resourced again and overtasked when we're
Yeah.
making up. And then you get your slips, trips, and falls and cut fingers. So your incident types are slightly different.
Why do you think people are so reticent and reluctant to use body worn cameras? Because the police use them. And, I've worked for a service at one point in time where we nearly started using them, but people were scared to death of them because they all thought they were going to get sacked or someone would hear them saying a thing in the appliance bay. But I think for operational incidents, being able to record all of your movements, thoughts, decisions, conversations, and then being able to submit that in a trusted environment to get some genuine feedback about your performance.
Yeah. Well, I think for me, it's the only way forward. Exactly what you've just been saying. We talk to strategic managers and tactical managers at Incident Command, and we sort of do it to death about decision logs and recording those decisions and the rationale behind those. Now, there's not a lot of people that have got the time and the resources to actually start sitting down and recording their decisions as they're making them.
It's
But the
always a
body
bit
worn,
shit when you read them afterwards, isn't it? It's not really an accurate reflection of what really happened.
no, but you could probably put the rationale on stuff, but the actual decisions are captured on a body worn camera, which would be absolutely spot on for me. And I think that is the only way forward.
Mm.
And we did the same thing with the CCTV cameras on appliances. At first, everybody said, "Oh, Big Brother's watching us. They've got appliances with cameras in the cabs." But it's actually helped a lot of drivers in legal cases when they've had a small bump or an accident, or even when there's been some aggression shown to firefighters up and down the
Yeah.
country.
But also when they've been captured off the front of appliances that are parked right in front of an incident, and someone said, I was looking at the debrief for the Manchester Paul's Hair World, and Stephen Hunt, they used that information because they said, no, look, he puts his cylinder on. He asked for an increase in pressure on the branch, because he tested his branch, he tested the whole thing. He closed down his set. He checked his low pressure warning whistle. He did everything right.
Yeah.
And that were enabled because no one was able to go, oh, he was a crap firefighter or he didn't do his job properly. No, he did everything right.
Yeah.
And it's those moments where it protects him and his family and his children because they get what they deserve because he was a great firefighter. But people don't see that side. They're just scared that they're going to get sacked.
No, I think that's just a cultural thing. I think also with that can be used for a positive effect as well, to say, look, this is the guy testing the set, asking for pressure, doing every single thing right. That can be used in training scenarios up and down the country, everywhere.
Yeah, 100%.
But you can capture that and you can have a whole host of incidents or decision-making tools all on a bank, and you say, well, these are examples of good practice.
I wanted to ask you because on a previous conversation we spoke about, because incident command is only one of the aspects that you do is your plethora of skill sets and how you train the UK Fire
Yeah.
and Rescue Service. But you mentioned a gentleman, John Fletcher, and some of the work you'd done together before. I wonder if we could go in that direction for a minute.
Yeah, I met John. I was working for the Fire Service College for about 7 or 8 years. I met John. He came to the college in about 2018 or 19. He finished. He was a group manager on. He's actually off duty at the time of the Manchester Arena bombing.
Wow.
But like myself, you, and many other officers in the service would pick the phone up and say, "I've heard this incident's gone off. Do you want me to help, or can I help at all?" And they said, "Yeah, come into control and open up the major incident room if you can." And
Yeah.
in John's own admission, it's probably the worst telephone call he's ever made, because he ended up for 2 years in a public inquiry afterwards.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, John and I, we started off doing incident command training and assessment. I've done some development work for firefighters to get them ready to get through, say, station manager level exams. John and I then have branched off a little bit to do marauding terrorist attack training, which was on the forerunner of the Commonwealth Games. We were doing quite a bit on different services, again using the American software that we used to do a small fire, and then perpetrators move to a different part of a city, few stabbings take place, and then it ends up as a siege. Very, very similar to what's just happened in Nottinghamshire.
Yes.
So
well, it's happened so many places, doesn't it? It's showing it the fruits of its labour, because I think it's critical training now for incident commanders across the whole of the UK.
Yeah, well, and the other point, the service that we went to, they only actually have 2 people in control at any one time. Now, some of the recommendations from the public inquiry were saying that at a major incident, then a third person should be brought in purely to monitor the airwave radio system. Well, they haven't got that facility at all, because they've only got 2 people in, and it's very, very apparent that initially your level 1 commanders will be drawn into something as basic as an RTC. It'll come through as an RTC or something similar. And then, as things start to unfold and other incidents happen, like the perpetrators move off and start stabbing people, then all of a sudden you're in an MTA incident. They may have used fire as a weapon, so they're just dealing with a normal fire. And do they then say, "Well, I'm in an MTA situation. Do I withdraw? Do I carry on?"
Yeah.
As the
Where's my Nilo?
Yeah. Where's the exactly the importance of Nilos in this is unbelievable. We've
a lot of services don't have Nilos, do they? Is that mandatory that they all have them? I think some are regional.
Some are regional nowadays, yes, but all the services that we've dealt with have internal Nilos. And at one point, there used to be a bit of a sneaky beaky thing, and so it's all secret. We can't tell anybody anything.
Yeah.
But then nowadays, I think it has changed quite a lot. That the mindset is that we should share this information. One of the outcomes from the Manchester Arena bombing was that JESIT didn't work and it failed.
Yeah.
Well, the fire service applied JESIT principles correctly.
Yeah.
But some of the other services didn't, and they didn't share some of this information, which then ends up with an unclear picture of what they're actually trying to deal with.
I think 2 rendezvous points got declared, didn't they? And the fire service stuck to the one that we'd said, but it hadn't been communicated to the police or the ambulance, and the ambulance were already on the scene. So they originally went to the RVP, but then proceeded because the comms hadn't made its way round, and it unravelled, didn't it?
Yeah, it did. We've got the recording of the original methane message sent by British Transport Police.
Oh, wow.
And every single scrap of information that you would need is contained in that methane message. It was passed to a call handler in London, and it was guided and controlled a little bit by the call handler. They were saying, like, slow down a bit, talk to me, tell me what risks you've got, what, how many people are injured, what are you doing now? What I want you to do is, I know you want to get on hands-on, I know you want to give CPR, but I need you as my eyes on the ground. So I want you to take a step back.
Yeah.
And they talked about every single aspect that you needed that information on, but that methane message never got passed to anybody. So unfortunately, that was the beginning of the failures of the Manchester Arena bombing.
I'd love to speak with John if you're able to connect us afterwards, and if he's willing to come on and talk. We never let anybody say anything they shouldn't say, because I know inquiries come with a big cost if you get them wrong. But just give people those insights, I think it would be incredible. When you're talking to brand new incident commanders now, and people that are first taking that first step to the rank, whether it's an LF, a crew commander, crew manager, whatever people call it in their services, what do you think are the common mistakes? Some of the things that they think they've got to change, or they think they've got to become a company person, or what? Because sometimes you see people end up micromanaging great firefighters just because they've now got a rank and they think they've got to have the right answer all of the time. What are some of the common mistakes that you find, and what advice would you give to people moving into their first level of command?
Yeah, well, it is a tricky one. Like I said, I sat 15 years in the back of appliance to learn my craft before I moved on to taking a rank. Some people, it goes back down to people's personalities as well. Some people will get the first rank and get pissed with power and saying, you do it my way or no way. Other people were a bit more they take more on board of, how am I going to get around this particular problem? I did my DMS, and they said when you ever ask anybody to do something, always use the C word. I said, but you can't say that. And he goes, no. He said, say, can you make up that line that's on the floor out there?
Yeah.
And it leaves them with no other option to say, well, yeah, of course I can make it up. So, well, can you make it up for me, please? Yeah. And if you ask people nicely, they'll do a good job.
Yeah, 100%.
People just need to be told what to do nicely.
Yeah.
And most firefighters will do an absolutely fantastic job if they're asked nicely to
present them with logic,
or ask them
to do something. Yeah, mate, we need to get this thing in place next. Can you just? And they'll go, yeah, roger that. You know what I mean? Yeah. But if you don't tell them the why, if you just say, do this now, and they're like, hang on a minute, what are you talking to me like a dickhead for? Why don't you just tell me what the plan is? And yeah, absolutely, of course, I'm willing to be part of it. That's what I'm here for.
Yeah, and the same thing with the first day as a leading firefighter at Central Station. There was all these old sweats knocking about, and it was a line on the floor. And I'd walk past the Three Musketeers and said, can you make that line up and put it on 301 for us? And they go, yeah, of course we can. And they made it up, put it on the line. And I walked off and thought, bloody hell, it worked. And it made me feel really strange. If I'd just said, make that line up, because the same things happened to me when they said, make that line up. I'd say, fuck off, make it up yourself.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that somebody used to do it to me all the time, and it really pissed me off, was they'd ask me to make a line up, put it on 301. I'd make the line up, put it on 301, shut the locker, go off to do something else. And then 2 seconds later, I'd hear the locker going back up. So he'd check to make sure that I'd done it and put it back in its right place. Yeah. You've got to trust people.
They ask 3 people to do it. They ask you, and then they go and ask James, and then they go and ask Sally, and they all turn up at the line, and you go, "Well, you just asked me to do that," and you're like, "Oh, well, sorry, yeah, he's asked me." Yeah. So what? Why does he think I'm crap? Does he think I'm not going to do it? And then you start to switch off.
Exactly. So, well, you've undermined them. You've undermined them straight away.
Yeah.
And in the end, the guy used to ask me, "Can you make that line up or that piece of equipment? Put it on 301." I'd say, "No, fuck off. You do it yourself." She says, "What do you mean?" She says, "Because you're going to open the locker and have a look in it anyway. Yeah. So put it on yourself, and then you know it's done. But have some trust in me.
Yes.
To trust me." Then that's the part of building good teams. If you don't build really good teams, then you are on your own all the time.
You're a micromanager, and people hate that. You just suffocate. And I think we find that now with like station managers sometimes sending a million emails and trying to micromanage watches. Then they argue. They're like, why is this crew manager or watch manager coming to me with this sort of question? Why can't they just deal with it themselves? Because you've conditioned them not to have assertiveness. You've conditioned them not to manage their own watch, because you keep dipping in and doing it for. You keep coming on and go, I'm just going to have a quiet word with so-and-so. Why? Why can't you just talk to me and I'll manage my watch?
Yeah, I used to do very similar. So, look, say, guys, don't come to me with problems. Come to me with solutions, and don't ever come to me and say, "Oh, we can't do so and so because of X, Y, and Z." So, well, what would you do in my position? It's got to happen,
Yeah.
and so it's going to be made to happen. So, what would you do if you were sitting in my chair today? How would you make it happen? Well, I'd do X, Y, and Z. You've just answered it, then. Go on,
Yeah.
off you go.
Yeah.
And that's
100%.
yeah, that's what had happened at a lot of the times. And when you retire from the fire service, depending on what level you get to, but there's a lot of shit that you have to do to keep feeding the beast, as I
Mm.
call it. So, and then when you retire, you actually realise that a lot of the stuff that you got involved with and did and wrote about and whatever policies you were doing, it was shit.
Yeah.
No, the main thing was getting out there, engaging with the community, doing the job, training the people correctly, having respect for people,
Mm.
and doing the job properly, and not
Yeah.
so much the shit.
People go, oh, I've ticked all the boxes and I've filled out the planner and I've written the report, but we've done no training today. We've not spent any time as a team.
Yeah.
And then you think you're successful in your job and you wonder why your watch is unhappy and people don't want to be there.
Well,
You're
that
too
was
busy
that
trying
was
to
one
say
of the
yes
things
up and ignoring people, below or beside you.
in the 90s. They'd have sort of charts on the station who did the most smoke alarms and home fire risk assessments and who's done this and what how many hydrants have you checked and all. It was all process driven. You've got to hit all these targets, and if you didn't hit them, then your targets would change every month, and it'd drive me mad. And I'd say, right, okay, then we'll bomb burst on home fire safety checks and hydrants and train this, that, and the other. And then Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, we're going to hit that. But Thursday and Friday, we're going to have 2 days of quality. And they'd say,
Yeah.
well, what do you mean by quality? I says, we're going to do pumps and primers all day.
Mm.
And then the next day, we're going to do ladders all day. And then the next shift for 2 days, we're going to do RTC. And then the next days after that, we're going to do first aid. So
Mm.
we'd have 2 days doing the corporate shit
Yeah.
and hitting targets, and anybody can hit targets because you can just make them up. Make the
Yeah.
targets up. We were the highest performing watch on Central Station for years, only because we made the targets up. Because nobody ever checks it, nobody polices it. We gave more smoke alarms away. You knock on people's door. We didn't even. It's free. Yeah, righto. Here we go. Then you're in. But
Mm.
then we'd do the quality afterwards, and we'd have all day knots and lines training, doing pumps and primers, RTC, everything. You do need a smattering of common sense in the fire service, and I know that they were trying to get rid of the word common sense, use common sense, but I think if you use your common sense, and that's going right back to the actual caliber of people that we recruit
Mm.
from the word go. If they've
Mm.
got common sense, I had a guy, he knew the chemical formula for a banana, but I thought, can he peel it? So he's got degrees coming out of his ears and this, that, and the other. And
Yeah.
I said, what else are you into then? And he said, well, I've just rebuilt. What do you do on your days off with your hands? Because you've obviously told me the biological makeup of marmalade, but can you get the top off the jar? And he said, well, I've just rebuilt a Volkswagen camper van. And I thought, right, okay, then what did you do? He says, well, I rebuilt all the engine. I said, well, what was inside the engine? All the pistons and the valves and the camshaft and the cam timing chain and this, that, and the other. And he proved to me that he knew what he was talking about and he could use his hands, not that he was just
Yeah.
a boffin. He was really
Using your
good at the same
hands is a
time.
massive
Yeah,
part of
yeah,
it. Yeah. Because not only have we
yeah,
shrank down some of the initial firefighter training courses, we've got to add in stuff that didn't have to add in there before. Like we should just do tool. I mean, some services do it, and I do it sometimes with our recruits, is just general toolbox familiarization because you can't no longer assume that everyone knows what a screwdriver is. You can't assume everyone knows what a socket set is because they've probably never had to use it.
you're absolutely correct there. These kids nowadays, if you had a pedal fall off your push bike, you'd have to go down to the shop, buy a new pedal, and bolt it on yourself.
Mm.
Nowadays, they throw the bike away and get a new one.
Mm. They go, what do you
So
do in that situation? I go to Halfords and give it to them. That's what they do.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
Halfords is probably all closed
yeah,
down now, but that's what they do. They don't just, they didn't have a crap motorbike that they had to fix themselves, or they
exactly.
didn't build a treehouse with their uncle or their granddad or their grandma or bloody whoever.
Yeah, you do ask people, younger kids nowadays, or even elder adults, and saying, "Can you pass me a flat blade screwdriver?" And they say, "What does that look like?" or a crosshead screwdriver, and you think, I haven't got a clue.
Yeah.
You think, well, surely that you've
Yeah.
used these before, and
Give me whatever. Give me the monkey
skills.
wrench. Give me the Phillips, and they're like, what?
Yeah, it's a life skill that's sort of disappeared altogether on some people.
And we need to adapt for that in our training departments.
Yeah, I think you're right. It is one of those things. We would get they had a chimney box or chimney kit, and they'd have a cockerel saw, floorboard saw.
Yeah.
They'd have a mirror.
Yeah.
A few
Well,
other
you
bits
just say we've got to get the hearth kit. What's a hearth?
Yeah.
Well, around the edges of a fire, the way it's constructed.
Yeah.
And they're like, no, you've lost me.
Well,
so we've got to build that into training now.
I don't know what's happening with promotional exams and stuff, but in the days when we went through the ADC process, I sat down with my area manager at the time and said, look, we need to get back to some exams again. And because it taught me, signs and symptoms of building collapse, the advantages and disadvantages of using a hose reel, blah, blah, blah. And you don't forget that, when you're 85 years old, I'd still be able to get an LPP to work at the side of a canal when I'm 95 years old, because it's, you studied it and you worked and you knew your stuff.
Muscle memory.
These kids nowadays, it's you need to get that muscle memory built into people, because if it's not muscle memory, it won't work. And if you get the simple things about hearth construction, well, why does it work like that? And what's underneath it? And how heavy is this big stone that's going to come crashing through the floor, or whatever?
What are the eaves? What's the gable end?
Yeah. Building construction is like massive key part. And we went back to using the IFE exams. So we've got an exam system and it's already there. It's not the National Fire Service Examinations Board anymore. We've got the IFE. We'll go back to the IFE. And hopefully we'll get people joining study groups and starting to learn the craft through studying material, which did happen. The chief officer at the time said, well, what happens if nobody actually goes to take it? I said, well, you're not going to get anybody promoted. Simple as that. And I said, it's a good migration tool. And I think you may have been one of them. I said, if you pass your IFE exams, you can migrate into the whole time. So you've proved that you've done, when they say a firefighter's a firefighter's a firefighter, but you've also got an IFE examination to say that you're qualified to do that. If I took my car into a BMW workshop, I'd bloody well hope that the mechanic is qualified to work on that car.
Yeah.
And when I went to have my knee done, I bloody hope the surgeon was qualified to put me a new leg on. And we're the only service in the country or in the world that you could have got to a station manager without even sitting an exam.
Yeah, how often to prove that knowledge?
And that's wrong.
100%.
That's wrong. One of the funny things, we had a big fire it was a big mansion that had been renovated, £1 million renovation on this mansion. It was beautiful. Fires in the roof. I pull up outside and they're all squirting water onto the roof. And I thought, all right, this is not going to start well. We've got to get inside to put the fire out. So I thought, right, what we'll do is use CAFs. Go inside, start using CAFs foam system on the inside to put this fire out. The group manager tipped out and he stood there next to me and he says, what's your tactical plan then, Andy? I said, right, what I'm going to do, we've got a turntable ladder coming. We're going to put it on the drive here and I'm going to shoot somebody up on the head of the ladder with a CAFs jet and we're going to start putting the fire out from this particular part that's collapsed. And he goes, no, you can't do that. I said, why is that then? He says, well, the weight's too heavy. I said, well, there's about 50 tons of logs up there. That they didn't walk up the drive on their own. They came in a big hook-off lorry. So our turntable ladder weighs about 16, 17 tons. So I'm sure that's okay. No, I want ladders. I want 4 13.5 ladders pitching and people working off the head of ladders. I said, no, surely. And he says, if you don't do it, I'm going to take over. I said, right. So I did that. Put people at risk.
I was going to say, they're not in the collective protection. They're working off a ladder, that physical, where that person is going to take at greater risk.
Yeah, but the thing that I'm coming to is JCDD 36 states about turntable ladders, and one of the exam questions for the IFE exams was, or the station officers exams was, what is the weight of the unburdened jack on a turntable ladder? And the answer was 1.02 tons. So I thought, well, hang on a minute. If I've got the jacks out and they're all nicely spread out and they've got a plate on the floor for the jack to sit on, the unburdened jack is obviously the one that's furthest away from the turntable ladder, and it's got 1.02 tons on it. So that means there's probably only about 2 tons on that jack, 3 tons on that jack, and 4 tons on that jack. So the weight distribution is fuck all. So why was he telling me to put people on ladders? And it's one of those things that it came back through your exams. That when am I ever going to need that shit? And then it came back, and there it was.
Yeah. But again, I've worked on sites and my dad had a building firm. So you start to get an understanding for space, loading, ground underfoot, just general working environments. But so much of that is either not encouraged or is simply lost from people's cultural and social development. They're just not got that now. And if we don't impose that through testing, exams, training, whatever it might be, we're going to have those things where people think they're doing the right thing, but they haven't actually got the foundational knowledge to support their decision making.
Yeah, well, that was the point at Manchester when the fire service, and I think John was the person that coined the phrase in the inquiry, but somebody else has used it in the actual report, and he said that the fire service thought we were making all the right decisions. The fire service made the right decisions, but got completely the wrong outcomes.
Yeah.
And it's how you measure the outcomes. And that's where I know we've touched on it before about what we were talking between ourselves, me and John. Somebody's going to do a paper on this, probably Sabrina or somebody else. But it was like we ended up, you fall into what we call a decision vortex. And we've all heard of decision traps and all the other distractions. But if you think you're making the right decisions, but there's no actual check or balance to say, well, what was the outcome? What was the outcome of that decision?
Yeah.
Was it right? Was it wrong? Did anything change? So you've got decision, action, outcome, change. And if it's zero, and then you're just going round and round in circles. The same thing happened, say, at Atherstone on Stour. Kept pumping breathing apparatus whereas in on extended hose lines. It's really, really hot. It's really, really hot. We can't find the fire. 4 firefighters got killed. We've all seen Grenfell Tower. When they're all going back saying, bloody hell, it's all on fire again. Oh, shit, it's going through the cladding, blah, 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 blah. Stay put policy. You just stay where you are and we'll get to you. In theory, that's right. So the decision was right, but the outcome was completely wrong.
Yeah.
Until they had a decision maker turn up and say, right, get them out.
Yeah.
And when they did the presentation about Atherstone, they sat there. I was a group manager at the time, and they went through everything and they said, is there any questions? And I thought I was going to get completely laughed out the room like the Cadbury Smash advert. And I said, well, when did the discussion take place to say, right then, Pete, what's your tactics? Well, we keep putting BA in. How many BA have you put in? 12 up to now. And it's red hot and they can't find the fire. Yeah, well, clearly the tactics are wrong. So what we're going to do then? Should we bring everybody out and let the fire come to us, or make an entry somewhere else in the roof or whatever to try and bring the fire to us? And then we can start putting the fire out. When did that conversation take place? And they just stunned silence. No, it didn't.
Yeah.
And the same things happen. It happens over and over and over again. When did that decision get to take place to say, this isn't working correctly, let's do something completely different?
I say the definition of insanity is doing the same thing and expecting a different outcome, isn't it?
Yeah.
Mate, I've absolutely loved that conversation. Is there anything you want us to go into, or any thoughts, questions, queries, requests of the listeners?
To be fair, Pete, thank you very much for asking me to come on. I've really enjoyed it, and it's, for me, it's about putting things back to the fire service. The fire service was good to me. I was working with an ex-special service guy at the college, absolutely fantastic, and he's very, very switched on. And he said, was it a job or a vocation for you? I said, well, it's been my vocation. It's a way of life for me.
Yeah.
He goes, no, it's not. It's just a job. And I kept saying to him, I said, no, it's not just a job. It's for me. And he goes, well, you joined at 16. You were probably institutionalized into that job. I said, but it's a job. And you do sometimes think, yeah, it was a job. It was, you produce so much shit. And when you've retired, oh yeah, actually, some of that shit was actually shit just to feed the beast.
Yeah.
But putting things back and helping people is what I joined for in the first place anyway. I had a guy come to me. He was taking his station manager's exam and he's been held back a little bit and sort of batted back a little bit in the promotion process. So I said, well, I'll do some development with you. I'll help you through it and I'll tell you exactly what you need to do to get past. And this is one of the things when I was the training manager, I said, look, we're failing people for not doing, say, a 360 at an incident. What happens if he does a 359? Well, he didn't do a 360. So we can't tick boxes like this. And we need to prepare people. What we did, we failed people, then give them a development program and then retested them again later. I said, that's all wrong. It's taking time, money, effort to do all of that. My son at 16 was one of the youngest people in the country to do his private pilot's license. And at 16 years old, he came up to me and said, Dad, do you want to come and watch me do my first flight, solo flight? I said, solo flight? He said, yes. I said, how many lessons you had? It's about 8. I said, so you can fly a plane 750 foot above Leicester city centre, but you can't ride a moped through it. And he went, yeah. And I sat there with my heart in my hand and I thought, actually, the instructor's got it right. He's got to be absolutely confident that Charlie will take the plane off, do his circuit and land it without killing himself or smashing the plane up. So we should apply that to our training and our incident command assessments to say, we get them ready first. And when we're ready, we think that they're 100% ready to pass the assessment, then we'll assess, rather than we'll assess you, fail you, and then all of a sudden we'll give you a development program. It's like doing your driving test. Oh, I'm sorry, you failed your driving test. Well, here's all your lessons now.
Yeah.
That's not right.
But I absolutely agree. And I think it's only from people like yourself and so many of the guests that we've had on who continue to lean in to the job that they loved or the vocation that they love, because that's the one thing about a lot of the emergency services, and certainly with the fire service, that even after people have theoretically finished their professional stint within it, they still hang around and they still continue to pour value back into it, mate. And I love the value that you've poured back into this over the last 90 minutes or so, mate. It's been a real privilege. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pete. Thanks for inviting me. It's been really good. I've really enjoyed it.
The Firefighters Podcast is put together to develop, inspire, and hopefully even motivate those individuals who have chosen to serve our communities and be part of the first responder family. It's brought to you by myself, operational firefighter Pete Wakefield. If you have enjoyed today's episode and you want to see the podcast continuing, please head over to our Patreon page where you can support the ongoing efforts of the podcast. Please hit that follow, subscribe, or rate button on whatever platform you're listening to. Please support your emergency services responders, and thank you for listening.